So you've probably seen what's been going on in the States, where social media platforms have been taken to task by parents and legislators for just not doing enough to protect children. You may even have heard Mark Zuckerberg apologize in the Senate to families of victims. Well, back here in Canada, the Canadian Centre for Child Protection is also doing something. They are trying to hold social media giants like Meta and TikTok accountable for also not doing enough to protect youth from online harm. And so they have created a database which tracks exactly that, online harm. Here to tell us more is Signy Arnason, the Associate Director of the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. Thank you for your time today, Signy.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us about this database, what it entails, and what you really hope to achieve with it.
Well, as you were mentioning, on the heels of the Senate Judiciary Committee hearings where the CEOs of the big tech companies came and had to talk about the harms that were occurring on their platforms, we decided to kick off basically a public archive of media and research reports that basically demonstrate the failure of the technology industry to protect children from online harm. So, what we're very accustomed to in dealing with this issue, and we've been operating the national tip line now for well over 20 years, is the company saying they have no tolerance for this type of conduct on their platforms, but meanwhile, there are countless stories that kind of demonstrate the opposite. So actions speak louder than words, and this public archive, really the intention is to demonstrate how these issues continue to persist within the industry.
What specific, I know we can't go into a whole big list, but if people are trying to grasp the idea of online harm, I think there's a large scope, is there not?
There is. So in terms of what we documented in this archive, we looked at issues within the media tied to child sexual abuse material continuing to appear on these types of platforms, child exploitation at large, whether that involves grooming, online luring, sextortion-related incidents. Then you get into all the mental health-related issues. Some of those were talked about in the U.S. at the Senate hearings. And then privacy-related issues and basically an overall lack of commitment to moderating platforms. All of those things are kind of covered off in the type of media stories that we've pulled forward and tracked in this one location.
When I think about what could come of this, I find myself thinking of like the sex offender registry. So is the idea that you're identifying that this is happening and it makes people more aware? Because I think to myself, with that registry, and I understand the goal and the purpose of it, and yet how much does that actually do to prevent kids from harm? There's no guarantee that that person isn't going to harm another child.
Well, what we've been saying for a long time is that, we're dealing with this issue related to kids being harmed and exploited after the event has occurred. So what we've been calling for is this industry to be regulated like any other industry is. So they have to actually, in fact, demonstrate if they're going to have kids on their platforms, that their platforms are safe for them to be on. And instead, we come at it from the opposite side. So what this intends to do is to show that, regulation is long overdue. We've had the UK put into place their Online Safety Act. We know Canada is actually looking at it as well. We've got Australia, Ireland, other countries around the world that have taken steps to put in a regulatory framework that these companies have to follow. And it's just long overdue because we have kids being, drastically harmed online as a result of no guardrails around these platforms.
I'm curious, though, so with all governments, variety of governments, as you just outlined around the world, taking at least early measures, right, preliminary measures, I'm not sure what it is, different countries and how serious or how different those guardrails are if they have them up already. What is it you're not getting back from the social media companies themselves beyond lip service to, yes, we understand the problem?
Well, it could be we're sending notices to them to remove child sexual abuse material, and they may end up in a debate with us as to why it should or should not be removed. So we have struggles in that capacity operating, and we do that through a tool called Project Arachnid. We'll go out to companies where we see the same thumbnail image associated to a lot of these criminal network rings that are coming out of the Ivory Coast, Nigeria, that are sextorting tons of kids within Canada so that this same thumbnail image is used. We know the technology exists to detect that image through hashing measures. And why is it that they have to be notified after the harm has occurred instead of identifying where these accounts may be sitting on their service? So there are all sorts of measures they could be preemptively putting in place. And, we're on the front lines of fighting with them over this needing to happen. And currently that schema is voluntary.
I mean, I find myself, so Aaron's asking about what the media giants aren't doing. I find myself wondering what the government's not doing. As you said, we're way, way behind on this. Why is that? And why is it so complicated to put some sort of regulation in place?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think what the Senate Judiciary Committee hearings really demonstrated is, they've had them before, and certainly they said they have no tolerance, and they were calling out the CEOs, but really until they decide to legislate, this cycle repeats, because companies don't in fact want to be moderating and putting these things in place because it chokes user engagement. And when you choke user engagement, you actually start to lose the opportunity to advertise, which is where their profits come from. So, there's a lot of money on the line here for these companies, but when we're talking about children and the fact that we've done it in all other spaces, we've kind of absolutely abandoned kids in this realm, and we need to do more. And absolutely, if governments don't step in, we're just going to see more of these hearings, and it'll just be, again, the words that with no meaning behind them.
The way you lay this out, I mean, it doesn't sound very hopeful. I mean, you're talking about companies with gigantic advertising revenues who don't want to give those up because that's their business. They're public companies. Are you, in fact, hopeful anything will change here?
Well, things turned a little bit for us when the UK was able to pass their Online Safety Act. Now, granted, it'll take a few years to get the regulations in place and have Ofcom as their regulator manage all of these things. But, I mean, that is an absolutely big population base to turn the tide on saying, no, we demand more in relation to how you're operating these services and what you need to do if children are on them. So that was a huge win. We certainly have Australia doing important things. That's a smaller market. But, this is also why we need Canada to step in. It's less about, necessarily the size of our population. What it does is it sends the message to the globe and other jurisdictions like the European Union that are considering the same thing, that actually this matters. This is really important, and we can't continue to leave children to their own devices to protect themselves. It's just not working.
I imagine that's what drives you, because I'm thinking that this must be really difficult work to do.
Yeah, it's not easy, and I think it's not easy because we feel like in many ways we're kind of screaming into a silo, and we want people to be listening because we're on the front lines of receiving thousands of reports from Canadians. We're issuing over 20,000 removal notices around the world through Project Arachnid. We're doing that every single day. We know how big this problem is. We're not going to address it on the policing side. Police cannot keep up with this issue. You can't throw enough money at this. We have to get out in front of it. And that means that these companies bear some responsibility for keeping kids safe.
Agreed.
Quite a challenge. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Very much appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
That is Signy Arnason from the Associate Director of the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. This is, when you consider it is.
That's why I was thinking that. I'm like, God, this is hard work to do, and to keep at it all the time and feel like you're not like you're getting nowhere because they're making progress, but good God, it's moving so slowly.
And it's not happening in a vacuum. We think of ourselves in this country, and it's happening around the world. And you hear 20,000 cases going on every single day that they bring to the attention of these companies. And what gets done? What gets done?
Not enough.